Hi guys, my name is Brandina and today we're going to be talking about how to learn a foreign language. Particularly some tip that I have when it comes to learning a foreign language that I like to share with my friends. So for some context, I grew up speaking English and Teochew, and then I learned Mandarin in school. I self-taught myself Japanese, and then I am currently learning Spanish. And how I've decided to approach Spanish after my first language learning mistakes with Mandarin and Japanese is I learned that with any language you should do two things immediately. One is that you should Google the top most common frequently used verbs in any language and memorize the heck out of those, because verbs are like the heart of a sentence. You can mix and match like subject, object, but the verb, the action is there to connect those ideas. And if you can get that, especially the most frequently used verbs, the 100 most frequently used verbs. Okay, there we go. Then you will suddenly understand so much in that language, and then everything else is like you're just picking up adjectives, subject, object, but in the most basic form of a sentence. You've got the heart of it. And then the second tip is to then learn just the frequently most used words in daily life. So you go from the frequently most used verbs to the frequently most used words. Because the goal is most of an everyday language, you are really using only the same, like if we were to do the 80-20 rule, I would say like 20% of our everyday vocabulary makes up for like 20% of vocabulary makes up for like 80% of our communication, I would think. But you're always using the same words like from, to, and, the, there, here, it, numbers, things like that. So once you have those down, then everything else becomes a lot more simple because you'll learn the daily words that everyone uses often. So at some point, once you have all of the like main foundational pieces of a language, everything else you just learn on the fly as you hear people say it. Obviously you want to learn the phrase like, how do you say this? Or what is this? What is this in English? And then eventually when you get really good at language, you just ask, what is this? And someone will tell you what the name of it is, and you remember it, like a baby being like, Mama, what's this? And you're like, honey, that's a camera. Yeah, pretty much just like that. So those are two. And then the third one, if you want to improve fluency, I did mention in a previous video, is that you should just learn all of the different filler words, conversational filler words, and agreeable phrases and reactions in any foreign language. So the example I used in that video was that in Japanese, people don't say or that's it's English. And that also puts you back into an English mindset. You want to stay in the Japanese mindset and that framework so you can continue the flow, and it flows a lot better. So you say, do yaro ne, you know, things like that. So these things will make you seem more fluent as you're buying time to figure out the next words of what you want to say. Yeah. And number 4 is how I like to try to improve fluency is a lot of shadowing. So something I did when I used to live in Japan, it was during COVID time, we would wear masks, and I was teaching children. And also, you know, I was around my coworkers, and what I do is as they talked, I would kind of just like mutter under my breath, just copying what they say, wakarahen, toyaro ne, and it's kind of a little psychotic, but no one needs to know. But it worked really well, and I felt like some of my coworkers or people were saying how my Japanese sounded a lot smoother, because what you're doing is you're retraining the muscles, your mouth muscles, and yourself to this new rhythmic speaking pattern, to get used to the pronunciation and also the rhythm, so it flows a lot better, so that when you learn a new word, you've heard it before, you've said it before. Like, I don't know, sometimes kids would be like, I don't understand this, like wakarahen, but that's like one word. I'm trying to think of like a whole full sentence, but I can't think of one from the top of my head right now. But yeah, that's pretty much what I would recommend, is a lot of shadowing to like normal native speakers. And also the fifth thing, I think it's the fifth thing, I kind of lost count at this point, but I would also suggest that when you should watch shows even when you don't understand what the heck they're saying. Just guess. like guess from context clues what it's about. And when you hear the same words in the same context over and over, you start to associate those words in the same context, and then you can hear it and understand it better. If you can improve your listening, I think listening should precede speaking actually, because listening will give you intuition. You're essentially like forming your intuition if a sentence sounds right or wrong. So then when you speak it, you're like, that didn't sound right. And like, where did that come from? That come from your intuition of hearing that same thing over and over. And then I think where language learning classes, like formal language learning classes, sometimes, I wouldn't say fail, but where they have their shortcoming is that they don't teach you the art of context clues and guessing the heck out of everything. And what I mean is that when I was living in Japan, there was so many scenarios, like me going to the convenience store, me going to the post office, going to the doctor's, going to the train, where I didn't understand anything. But what happened was that whenever I was talking to someone, I had to use context clues on like speed. You become Sherlock Holmes every day and you get really good at it. So for example, at the convenience store, I go get, put the food and give it to them, and then they're like, oh, atatakaemasu ka? I still can't even say the word because there's so many like atatakaemasu ka or whatever, but they're essentially asking, do you want me to warm this up? And I was like confused. I'm like, hi. I kind of take a guess, like yes or no, and just see what happens. And then usually I might want to say no if they're asking like pointo card, like something about payment or signing up for a point card or whatever, and I'm like, then I should just be like no. But when they're like, and at first I'm confused, and they see I'm confused, and then they point to this, and they just like point to the microwave, and I'm like, oh, do I want to warm this up? And I'm like, oh, hi, onegaishimasu, whatever. So then you realize like, okay, whenever I hear this phrase, something, maska is a question. Okay, I know this is a question. I know this word, I can never get that word. I don't know why. I know what it is when I hear it, but I can't say it. But it's like, would you like your food warmed up? And there's just so many scenarios of this where you just have to use so much context clues. It's like, for example, if you do it enough time at a convenience store where someone's just like holding up chopsticks close to the bag and asking you, ohashi, da 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 da, and then you realize the word for chopsticks is hashi, and you're like, oh. And then when you already know, again, going back to that was the 20% most frequently used words in their language, you will realize that they say hashi and then they have maska. Ka at the end is a question. You already know this is a question. Your brain is piecing it together even if you don't understand the full sentence. And I think most importantly, it's getting comfortable. Being uncomfortable with what, not knowing completely 100% of a sentence, but focusing more on what you can get right than focusing on how many that you missed. Because I think in language learning in classrooms, we get so caught up in the test scores and how you're so focused on all the things you didn't get perfect or right, but no one's ever perfect in language learning. That's the counterintuitive, the paradox of trying to learn a language in the classroom. Like, you want to learn a language, but it's not really best done being graded, because the whole point of language learning is making mistakes over and over and over, and that success should actually be graded and measured on whether or not you can get your message across and get what you want, in return, and communicate with a person, even if it's not perfect. If the interaction ends up turning out how you need it to, it was a success. The perfect example is when I had to call a billing company, like the water company, because my hot water gas wasn't working. I think it was the gas company, and my hot water wasn't working, and I was just saying things like, mizu wa samui desu, and I was using the wrong cold. Samui is cold for weather, and the lady was just like, mizu wa mada tsumetai desu ka? And then I realized that, and I didn't understand what the heck is tsumetai. And I think we just kept going back and forth like that, and it was such a fail. But eventually she gave me some instructions to push some buttons, and I pushed some buttons and it worked. And then she asked the same thing, and I'm like, hi, mizu samui desu, mizu wa atsui desu. And I said hot. So I don't even know if I used the right hot at this point. I say it was a success because I got my hot water back. And then I googled it later and I realized that the lady was using tsumetai for cold, and I was like, oh, now I know there's a difference. That was so embarrassing, but it worked. So I think that is probably like my favorite part about kind of, if possible, ideally, the best way I ever learned, and I think most people learn, is if you throw someone in a foreign country, because suddenly your desire to learn a language increases by like tenfold with the urgency of survival on the line. But either way, yeah, we are not all privileged to be able to do that. So this time around, I am currently studying Spanish on my own at home, but I'm trying to take the lessons and skills that I learned from my time in Japan and apply it to Spanish, my Spanish learning. So we'll see how that goes. In the meantime, pretty much how I've been able to figure this out was that with Mandarin, I'm so good at being like reading, writing, like book smart with it, but I'm not good at speaking and listening to it, to be honest. And that's because I learned it in a classroom setting, and there was good and bad to it. There was a time I was able to be very conversational in Chinese when I did study abroad in Taiwan for like a summer, and I got really good, like conversational good. And then after I came back and I stopped practicing for a while, and I was like, and I was like, fuck. Okay, but it's fine. It's somewhere in my brain. You know, it's kind of like riding a bicycle. But in Japanese, I decided to take on a different approach, which is like, what if I just do it completely full immersion, right? And the funny thing I realized is eventually I would hit a roadblock. So I was able to get really good at conversational phrases and short conversation and make basic sentences and say like this, but this, you know, kind of compound sentences. But I realized I had sometimes a common mistake that I'll keep making. Like, I got really good at saying phrases that I've heard before, but sometimes they might not be in the correct tense. So I would intuitively know to use the right phrase in this situation, but I would say it with a slightly wrong tense because I haven't heard it in the other tense yet. And I decided to reach out to a Japanese teacher to help correct some of my poor foundations in some respects. So I picked up a little bit of bad habits I had to unlearn. And she was saying that my Japanese was good conversationally, but if I want to sound more educated, I should actually open a textbook and read some more. So I decided to go back and learn some more grammar, and she wants me to read more so that when I read, I'm intuitively know how to form very grammatically pretty sentences instead of the kind of hillbilly way that I was talking previously. So I thought that was really interesting to know. Learn from my mistakes, guys, and see you in the next video. Bye!